Town Hall discussion, How Wyoming's Budget Crisis Affects You. It's really great to see such a large turnout for this event. The budget truly does affect all of us, and we're very grateful to our speakers who will be helping us understand some of the difficult issues that we're facing. The panelists will be introduced a little later. I'm Tom Brantley, one of the Braver Angels Wyoming state coordinators from Cheyenne. I put my email address at the very top of the chat box, which I'll explain in a minute. So you can write that down and email me if you're having any technical problems. Here's the rest of the Braver Angels team for this evening's workshop. Our Zoom participant manager is Chris Carfanta, the other Wyoming state coordinator from Manchester. Our Zoom feature manager is Fran Bunker from Sheridan, who is also our Braver Angels Wyoming Montana Alliance Planning Committee. And Lindy Kirkbride from Meriden and Cheyenne is also on our planning committee. She's also a co-chair of the Braver Angels National Rural Alliance. Lindy will explain how this event came about with the help of our partner for tonight's event, the Wyoming Tribune Eagle, and we'll introduce our moderator for this evening, Carrie Axton. This meeting is being recorded and will be available to the public on the Wyoming Tribune Eagle's YouTube channel. So anyone who does not want to risk appearing on that should turn off their video. And you can do that by clicking on the drop-down menu with the 3 dots at the top right of the box that has your picture in it. Or maybe you also have a stop video button at the bottom left of your screen that will appear when you scroll down. For those of you who are members of Braver Angels, and I hope all of you who aren't will want to join after tonight, this event is going to be different in several respects from what you're used to. In most Braver Angels events, the most common being the workshops and the debates, everyone participates, or at least has the opportunity to participate, and everyone's views are equally important. For this event, though, we are very fortunate to have 4 panelists whose role will be to educate us on the very difficult issues involving the state's budget crisis. So instead of learning skills or trying to understand each other better as human beings, this event is intended to help us understand particular issues. You will get a chance to ask questions and express your opinions. However, because of the number of participants and to take maximum advantage of the expertise of our panelists, you won't be able to actually speak. Instead, you'll be using the chat feature of Zoom. And you access this feature by clicking on the chat button that should appear when you move your cursor to the bottom of your Zoom screen. A window will open up on the right side of your screen, and then you just type into the rectangle at the bottom of that and hit return. Each of the panelists will first give an introductory speech. Then they'll respond to selected questions or comments that you've put into the chat box. You can be putting your questions and comments into chat while they are speaking or during the question period. Then the speakers will have an opportunity to discuss the issues among themselves and finally sum things up. So with that, let's get started. Over to you, Lindy.
Thank you. I am joined Tom after a Rotary presentation from the Colorado coordinator for Braver Angels just about a year ago. And we kind of just grabbed on and haven't looked back because it spoke to what was going on and the civility of what we want to have between reds and blues, and any time there's a civil conversation that's needed about important things. We don't want to make everything line up against the wall. We want to listen to each other, and that's the civility that Braver Angels represents. And so we began meeting with the newspaper, and Tom Brantley wrote an editorial explaining what Braver Angels was and that was clear last fall. And then we began a process of deciding that we need more how to demonstrate what is a civil conversation. So we roped in a red and a blue, and the red happens to be my husband, and the blue is was a long time friend, but no stranger to the paper. He's an editorialist. He's Roger McDaniel. And I don't know if you're on this call, but I think Alan, his, and Roger were signed up, and I so appreciate what they did. But they demonstrated that you can have a civil conversation and come from totally different points of view. And so it was really, and Alan and I were in the middle of having COVID, so we were able to do it anyway. But I also want to put a shout out to the Wyoming Tribune Eagle, who this year at their Zoom press meeting, they received 34 awards, and from the Wyoming Press Association, including 8 first place. But Brian Martin, the editor of the paper, got the Public Service Award for partnering with Braver Angels. The judges' sentiments said, the Wyoming Tribune Eagle managing editor Brian Martin are to be congratulated for making this significant effort to bridge the chasm of polarization and help cleanse the civil discourse of hate and vitriol. Well executed and very needed. Congratulations. And so with that, I want to turn the meeting over to our moderator. Carrie is she's from Utah. She's out of state. We drafted her to keep things just nice and neutral. And Carrie, I'm having a technology glitch. I'm not able to find that bio that you sent me. Would you mind just introducing a little bit about yourself? I know she's a social worker, and I think she has a great, she's been doing these wonderful coordinating for Braver Angels. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Lindy. I'm really happy to be here and be able to take a moment and lead this discussion. I first heard about Braver Angels after the 2016 election, and I was noticing how surprised, excuse me, how surprised so many people were about the outcome of the election. And it seemed to me that the only reason that we could be so surprised is that we weren't speaking enough to each other, and I wanted to do something about that. And so when I was speaking with some friends at a lunch, they said that they had heard about Braver Angels on NPR, and I should totally get involved with it because it was just like what I had been complaining about. And so I signed up, and I've never looked back. So that's how I come to be here. A little bit now about how we are going to conduct this. At Braver Angels, we believe in the importance of civic dialogue and the effort to find common values. There's no guarantee that conversation is going to solve all of our disagreements. But what we do know is that if we don't try, then for sure, nothing will happen. So when we listen with the intent to find common values, more often than not, there is something to find. So that is the spirit beyond which we are going to have this conversation. As ground rules, we ask everyone here to remember to speak for yourself, or if you're in official capacity as representing an organization, by all means, speak for that organization. But let's all avoid speaking for what someone else supposedly believes. We also ask you to avoid asking when it's time to ask questions, avoid asking loaded questions, and instead use questions of curiosity. So now I'd like to take a moment and introduce our speakers. First, we have Ashley Harpstery. She is the Executive Director for the Wyoming Taxpayers Association, which provides the essential connection and information between the state's taxpayers and the legislature. And prior to joining WTA, Ashley was the CEO of the Goshen County Economic Development Corporation, where she managed a countywide economic development effort. At the time, Goshen County was the only county utilizing an economic development sales tax, which Ashley passed for the 5th time in 2018 by a 72% margin. She was also the legislative co-chair for the Wyoming Economic Development Association and worked on several statewide initiatives. We also have Robert Godby, who's currently serving as the Associate Dean of the Hobbs School of Environment and Natural Resources at the University of Wyoming. He's also an associate professor in the economics department at UW. Additionally, he also serves as a Daniels Fund Ethics Initiative faculty fellow and as an adjunct faculty member with the MBA program at Pforzheim University in Germany. In 2019, he was appointed to serve on the state's Consensus Revenue Estimating Group in 2019. His research areas lead to being often interviewed by the national and international media on energy and macroeconomic issues. And outside of work, Rob enjoys spending time being walked by his dogs. Dan Swanitzer is a fifth-generation Wyomingite. He's currently serving as chairman of the House Corporations Committee after serving as the Revenue Committee chairman the past 2 years. He also served 4 years as chairman of House Corporations, Elections, and Political Subdivisions. He's in his 9th term in the Wyoming legislature, representing District 43 in southeastern Cheyenne. He's the longest serving legislator in Laramie County and 3rd in seniority in the Wyoming House. He holds undergraduate degrees in government and classical history from Georgetown University and an MBA from the University of Wyoming. We also have with us Senator Troy Mcewen. He was born in Cheyenne and graduated from Central High School and the University of Wyoming. His formal education finished up with graduating the Command and General Staff College of the U.S. Army and an MBA. He enjoyed a 27-year military career in the U.S. Army, retiring at the rank of Lieutenant Colonel. Following that, he went into the grocery business in Gillette and later reopened the grocery store in Wright. His business has won numerous awards, including from the Campbell County Chamber of Commerce. He's been married for over 27 years to Kathy Mcewen, and they have 3 children and 2 grandchildren, and Troy is a freshman senator from Senate District 24. Well, before we hear from our speakers, we have a poll question to see what you're currently thinking about Wyoming's options. So I believe that our staff is now going to place a poll question for everyone to see. Here we go. Go ahead and answer these questions for a moment. You should be seeing these on your screen. Can I get some head nods to ensure that you're all seeing it? You see the poll on your screen? There we go. I'm starting to. Okay, I'm seeing some responses now. We're going to show this poll again at the end. So it will be interesting to reflect on how the information that our speakers are about to give us will be incorporated. All right, Fran, how long are we going to run the poll for?
Let's just do about 10 more seconds. So if you haven't filled it out, please finish up. Thank you.
All right, are we ready, Fran?
I am getting an error, so you don't see the poll results?
Yeah,
I see.
yes, we do.
Okay, now you should see the results.
Okay. All right. So it looks like the top answer for spending cuts is number 2. Tax increases is 5 necessary. Combination 3 is necessary, and other is also 3. All right, so we'll see that again at the end.
Okay.
All right, so now we're going to hear comments from our speakers. And to all of you in the audience, we want to hear your questions and the ideas in the chat box as you have them. Now, we're going to have some guidelines for the questions. If your question or your idea is directed at a specific panelist, please state their name. And questions need to be real questions, not loaded or gotcha questions. So for example, a loaded or a gotcha question is, how can you justify having this position when, instead of saying that, you might say that it seems that your position is, what do you think about? So those are examples of more curiosity questions. And comments that you add could be stating your legislation priorities. And we may not be able to get to all of your questions and comments, but panelists will be able to see them in the chat box also. So now let's get started on our presentation. And each speaker will have 10 minutes. I'll give a warning when there's 2 minutes left, and then again at 30 seconds. So Ashley, would you like to start us off?
Okay, can everybody hear me? Okay, so thank you for the time today and the opportunity to speak to this group. I always start this conversation because it is about taxes with a little humor, so you can read that slide. What is the WTA, Wyoming Taxpayers Association? Is a 501c4 think tank, private nonprofit organization with a 501c3 foundation research arm. We're not anti-tax, we're not pro-tax, we are a think tank, and we center around our mission, which is to advocate for sound tax policy for a healthy Wyoming economy. Everything we do, it focuses around the cornerstones of taxation, and it provides a litmus test for all tax policy, which is justification. Is it equitable? Is it stable? Or is it transparent? I want to take my time to really explain what the tax structure is all about. When we decided to implement the severance tax, or the state did in the 1970s, the state became beholden to a boom and bust cycle. So in the late 90s, the former WTA executive director, Michael Walden-Newman, wrote a draft bill and helped push a special committee that was going to study the tax structure. You can see our cornerstones of taxation, cornerstone principles are emulated here and what they found out and what their findings were. But the committee stated that Wyoming's tax structure lacks equity, stability, and balance. The thing to note here is almost 75% of the state's tax revenue at the time was dependent on the minerals industry. This last summer, we took the opportunity to take a 20-year look back, and that is all memorialized thanks to COVID on YouTube. Chairman Zwanitzer, who at the time was chairman of Revenue Committee and one of our panelists today, helped participate in that committee and in discussion, and it's a great thing to go back and look at. So I'm going to have Braver Angels produce all these links that I'm going to talk about today. Fast forward to today, the minerals revenue is about 53.29% of the budget. When we're looking at tax structure for the state, there's 3 ways to tax. We have property tax, sales tax, and income tax. I think everybody probably knows on this call, we enjoy not having an individual or corporate income tax. But based off fiscal year 19, I got this data from the Legislative Service Office. 41% of our taxes and revenues were realized from property tax, where 31% was general sales tax, 21% was severance tax, and 7% was other taxes. So those are fuel taxes, cigarette taxes, alcohol taxes, and just miscellaneous taxes that are excise. When we're looking at property class tax assessment, and there's several bills up that are looking at the property classes this year, you need to realize that minerals is taxed at 100% of their value, while industrial properties are taxed at 11.5, commercial and residential are 9.5. This slide is to highlight how our tax structure works to pay for the services that we enjoy as private citizens. The Department of Administration and Information of Economic Analysis Division provided this data. So for a 3-person family with an income of $65,000 and owning a home valued of $250,000, the average taxpayer pays $3,500 in and receives $27,090 in benefits out. So what does that mean and what does that look like today? The general fund that funds those services, that's everything minus the school foundation program, because that's set up a little bit different. You can see how our revenue has come in over the last 20 years and where our appropriations is that line above of how we have appropriated the dollars for those services. So if you fast forward to this last year when we hit the pandemic, we had a budget shortfall in 2019. As we ended out that session, the legislature appropriated $2.9 billion to the general fund. They realized they weren't going to be able to pay those bills off that budget. So the governor worked on budget reductions this summer with step 1 of a hiring freeze and stopping all contracts. The step 2 was a 10% cuts, where you might have heard of the pain about that this summer, with $250 million realized in actual savings. I have a picture of the Chugwater rest stop. That was one of the things that WYDOT decided to do, was to close several rest areas to save money. The town of Chugwater decided that that was not something that they wanted to see end, so they figured out a way to privately fund it. So they've been kind of the poster child of, as Dr. Godby gets into what is our value system, Chugwater really spoke up on, they wanted to save their rest stop. Step 3 this last summer was looking at an additional 10% cuts that was analyzed in tandem with the financial outlook in October, which ended up being about 5%. And then the other things that the legislature will look at to look at that stopgap is the use of the reserves, all their savings accounts. As we have new federal policy, the additional federal stimulus and flexibility as to use. And of course, the last thing is increased revenues. Fast forward today when the legislature reconvenes on Monday. The general fund is balanced as presented from the governor's supplemental budget and the Joint Appropriations Committee's recommendations. There still is a shortfall of $298 million in the school foundation program, which is a different pot of money. The big debate will be the budget bill. And so there are programs that have been cut. And so it will be a big debate amongst the legislators on what does Wyoming want and those programs that were cut and who's fighting for the programming. The one data point that will remain consistent is uncertainty, because we have new federal administration and policy effects that affecting our 3-legged stool of revenue, which is coal, oil, and gas. Coal production, as we all know, continues to decline, and the federal and state royalties remain volatile. Our other mineral that is often overlooked outside of Sweetwater County is trona, and it's encountered severe global impacts. The one thing that is certain is that Wyoming will have to continue to be creative and think about long-term solutions to our revenue and spending options. Just as a preview of the bills that are out there as far as the legislative tax talk, they're looking at a sales tax for education. There's been numerous tax exemptions that are up and under consideration. If you want to look at all the exemptions that are out there, knowing that we only have 3 ways to tax and we only use 2 of those through sales and property, there's over 60 exemptions that is out on sales tax, and you can look at all those. There's a fuel tax, there's a tobacco tax, there's considerable conversation about taxation on renewables, property tax assessment ratios. There's a new real estate transfer tax bill that just dropped. Mill levy increases maybe for potentially for community colleges. There's an income tax that's out there on unearned income tax on capital gains. And then there are some administrative tax issues. So my Super Bowl pick for the 2020 general session for the Wyoming State Legislature is reduction in spending, specifically in education, plus payment cuts, plus use of the LSRA, which is the Legislative Stabilization Reserve Account, equals maybe a revenue enhancement. I think this group is really working on understanding the coffee cans of money and the ability to spend those. There is a bill out there that the governor is pushing with the potential for one checkbook to create transparency. And then my questions to this group today is, what is the end goal for Wyoming? How do we get there? And let's keep the conversation going. The last slide I want to end with is my background's in economic development. So what does this economy mean for economic development and diversification? If you remember that slide I spoke to before with the cost of services with people, unfortunately, based off a study from Regional Economic Models Incorporated, that economic diversification efforts are unable to improve revenue flow in Wyoming without tax reform. In 2018, the Joint Revenue Committee of the state legislature looked at several different industries and several different states that had some similar makeup as ours. And if you look at the 4 industries that are highlighted here, oil and gas, chemical manufacturing, utility, and food manufacturing, oil and gas is the only industry in our state that can survive on our tax system where revenues outpace expenditures. Every other sector, the expenditures outpace the revenues. Where if you compare us to Utah, North Dakota, and Kentucky that have a similar industry base, their revenues outpace their expenditures. Remy said under its current tax structure, Wyoming efforts to stimulate non-resource sectors in the state presents fiscal challenges. Only growth and resource sectors have significant positive fiscal impacts. And then I have some other slides that we can come back to that we might talk about later, which is the Wyoming estimated tax capacity that's been in the news and the Craig long-term revenue forecast.
All right, thank you so much, Ashley. I know we'll all be wanting to take a closer look at those slides afterwards, so we're glad this is being recorded. Next up, we will have Robert speak to us now. You ready with your slides, Rob?
Just one sec while I find my my slides, and I will present them. There they are.
No worries. We're all learning
right.
this technology now.
Yeah, the problem is I keep too many windows open, and whenever I go to share something, I just have far too many. So can you see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So let me go back a slide. So Ashley has kind of outlined the situation and the numbers. So what I thought might be useful is going to the opposite side. And this is, what I'll do is present a little bit of research that a colleague and I just finished, looking at what people in Wyoming want to do and where they kind of are on this. So what I'll present is some survey research, and we've done the survey in a way that's a little bit different from what most people are used to. So let me just explain to you what we were asking and what we found out. What we're basically trying to figure out is we have 3 ways of dealing with the deficit as we face it. We can increase our revenues, we can decrease our spending, or if we do, even if we do either both or none of those, we can use savings. And we have currently the LISRA account that Ashley talked about, approximately $1.2 billion we can think of as being in there, at least at the time we did the study. And what we asked people was just basically, what is your preference in tackling this? And we gave people some choices. Now, the way we approach this survey is not, the typical elicitation survey where you ask people, say, to rank things or, are you in favor of? We actually used a very modern survey technique, and it's the same kind of technique that might be used by a company if they were developing a new product. And it's especially suitable to try to figure out how people feel about things like budget deficits. So imagine you were designing a cell phone, and you are maybe thinking about the size of the screen, the brightness of the screen, and how long the battery will last. And the thing about a budget problem like this is there are trade-offs. If you want to decrease the deficit, you're going to have to either decrease spending or increase revenues. And of course, both of those are costly to you. And you could kind of think of that in the cell phone context as, a bigger screen's easier to see, a brighter screen's easier to see, but of course you'll have less battery life. And what is done very often by companies trying to figure out, well, what is the optimal phone to send to market? Which one would be preferred by the most people and maximize our market? And so you might think of how they would do this is they actually bring a very large survey group in, and they basically present all the combinations that they might be thinking of, and they ask people which ones they prefer. And so we use the same kind of option. So basically the survey looked like this. We asked people if to consider 4 options, and then the use of the rainy day fund based on the use of these options. So first, consider an increase in personal property and sales taxes. We didn't tell people specifically how these might change. We just said, imagine those taxes that you pay could increase by 0, 5, or 10%. And we told them how much that would change the deficit. Similarly, we asked them to think about K-12 education. And again, a 0, 5, and 10% cut. We asked them to think about all state agencies and a 0, 5, and 10% cut. And then we asked them to think about transfers to cities and towns that the state government makes. And again, a 0, 5, and 10% cut. So what we do is there's a lot of different combinations these could be presented as. And so we basically run people through a survey where we offer them a number of different combinations, and nobody sees every single combination. They'd be here all night. But showing each person a different set of combinations, we can cover all of them and then estimate the preferences of the overall population in the state. And so what we told them was very simple. We said, there's about a $480 million deficit, which was the deficit estimated when we first started on this survey back in the fall. It's gotten a little better since then. I should also say that we were looking at it after the 10% cut that Ashley talked about, that the governor imposed as phase 2 of the actions that he took. But this is before a 5% additional cut across agencies that was imposed in November. So again, that fits in directly with one of the choices we had. We also told them how much the rainy day fund had, and as they went through the choices and went through how each set of combinations would change the deficit and how much savings were used, we asked them which they preferred and whether they supported it or not. And of course, you might prefer one thing over another, but you might just be choosing the best of what you think are bad alternatives. So the reason we said, do you support it, is to try to figure out, would you actually support this? You know, I often say in this, you know, forgive the kind of violent analogy, but if somebody says, would you like a punch in the face or a kick in the stomach, you're not going to like either one of those. And that's kind of where we are with this budget deficit. Unfortunately, we face tough choices. So let me just show you what we found out from this survey, because it gives a little bit of insight, at least where voters were and actual residents in Wyoming. So this survey was conducted after the election in November, about middle of November to middle of December. We had representatives from every county. Over 480 people took the survey online. This was a representative sample that was very close to the demographics of the state. We worked with a company that actually develops these sorts of surveys to make sure that the survey sample was representative of the state. And 435 responses were used. Basically, there were some people in the survey who just basically chose the same, answered everything, or did the survey in a record amount of time, which indicated they weren't reading it. So once those were taken out, we had about 435 responses. And this is the first result. So this result, you could kind of interpret it 2 ways. So what is kind of the general preference? What are you most concerned about? So in other words, the higher the bar, the more concerned you are, the less in favor you are of that action being taken. And you can see there's 2 things here. First is the relative preference, and secondly, the overall share. So you can imagine thinking of this as maybe you like cake and you might like pie as a dessert or ice cream, but you have different preferences, right? So you might like cake better than pie and both much more than ice cream. And that's what this is showing. So you shouldn't interpret this as 28.6% picked K-12 as their largest or their biggest concern. what this says is they are most concerned about K-12 funding. Next is for each individual on average, nearly the same, increases in taxes. They're about, 60% is concerned about decreases to funding or cities and towns, and they're least concerned about using the savings right now. So those were the first results. Now, an interesting thing about this survey method is not only can you figure out what people would most want to do or least want to do, you can also estimate how their support will change as you change policies. So we built a tool for people in the state to look at, and they can actually look at these survey responses. They're actually on a website at the University of Wyoming School of Energy Resources, or you could just Google Wyoming citizen preferences, or we could send you the link. The bottom line is you can actually look at all of our results and see how public support would change as you changed any of these policies from 0 to 10%. So what did we find out? Well, this is kind of a complicated slide, but basically what this says is for the 4 different choices, if support is rising and it's above 0, that means by increasing that policy, support rises. And so this is approximately where we are after the governor's actions. So none of these policies have been enacted except state budget cuts to agencies. And you'll see that that was actually the estimated policy with the most support, but we've kind of topped out there. After this, we would expect voters to not be as supportive of cuts to state agencies. You can see the next line down is cuts to cities and towns, and people just aren't very sensitive to that. And one of the reasons is there's just not a lot of money to be cut out of the deficit by making cuts in that area. Basically, it's agencies or K-12 education are the areas where you can make the biggest difference to the deficit. If you look at the lines below, the blue line and the red line, what that says is any cut to education will actually reduce support. And so at 0, it goes all the way down to a 9.6% reduction from the baseline if you were to decrease K-12 funding by 10%. And just above that is what happens when we increase taxes. So basically this suggests that people are most concerned about K-12 cuts, and then most concerned about tax increases. So this gives you kind of a sense of where we might go. So if we were to estimate the total survey, if I go back a couple slides and show you where we were, if no changes at all were made, we estimated about 42%. That would gain about 42% support in the state, so less than a majority. We were able to actually identify what might gain the most support, and that's
30
what's shown
seconds,
here.
Rob.
Yep. Hello?
30 seconds. Sorry.
Yep, we're just about finished. So what we could also say is the policy that had the most support was actually one where we stay where we're at state agency cuts now of about 15% in total, or 5% since the summer. And we maxed out the cuts to cities and towns, but people didn't want to see either of either cuts to K-12 or increases in taxes. So what we might think about this is kind of an unworkable situation, because given that type of choice, you're going to have to use about $300 million every biennium out of the savings account. And what we also find, though, is that events like this might actually help people figure out what they might do, because as it stands now, people are very uncertain. So they're probably motivated to be against probably the largest changes to the state budget. But what they probably really need, and what we found in other polling, was that what they really felt is that they need more education. And that's what we're here to talk about tonight. So thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Rob. I appreciate all that information. And next up, we will hear from Dan. Dan, do you have slides for us, or you'll be speaking? Oh, let's say you are muted. There you go.
There we go. Let me put up a slide on this if you would now allow me to screen share. And that
All
way
right,
people
let's
can
get that set.
study some revenue enhancement options while I speak before
All
I get.
right, let's see what we got.
All right. That work?
Yes.
Great. So again, Dan Zwanitzer, this is my 9th term in the legislature, and I'm now the chairman again of corporations, elections, and political subdivisions, which deals with the boring stuff of government, utility law, insurance, local government elections. But I did do a 2-year stint on the revenue committee. I was lucky enough to serve what I would call the golden age of Wyoming, there from 2004 to 2010, with coal bed methane revenues, natural gas revenues. We had more money than any time in our state's history. During that time, as many of you who are long-term Wyomingites remember, right, we created the Hathaway program. We built new schools across Wyoming, brought our Wyoming prisoners home and built a new medium security penitentiary, passed multiple tax decreases in that decade, including taking the sales tax off food. And so really, you know, in about 2012, the golden age came to a close and we started showing some signs of wear and tear. And that's really the first time we found out that we had a structural deficit really in education. We've known about it for about 9 years, but we had an inordinate amount of savings built up. We had built the rainy day fund, built the permanent mineral trust fund that was giving us a large amount of interest income, almost 20% to biennium, just off interest into the general fund. And so things were really looking good. Even although we were on a slow decline, the structural deficit wasn't really problematic until about 2016. And you'll remember about 5 years ago, we had the perfect storm of when oil and gas and coal prices all plunged in about 6 months. But serendipity occurred once again in Wyoming, and our investment revenues went through the roof. So even though we had a larger structural deficit, we were getting over $400 million a year backfill into the rainy day fund that we were spending out of through investment income. And so we've been on kind of a slow, revenue decline, but our savings have held us together. And it was a problem that was always a couple years down the road, right up until about a year ago. And that's when everything, kind of 3 major things all hit at once. Really, the first was the price war between Saudi Arabia and Russia, where our oil prices, were decimated. They went negative there for a while in conjunction with COVID, which also hit and affected all of Wyoming's sales tax revenue, just economic activity in general. And then thirdly, the stock market plunge in collaboration really took a hit on our investment revenues, or our projected investment revenues. And so the great news right now is that it's all slowly coming back. It's just not quite enough to solve the problem before us. As was previously mentioned, the governor started initiating cuts. That's a statutory mechanism. When the legislature is out of session, we rely on the executive branch to start the cutting to make sure we can meet our budget. And Governor Gordon, I think, did an exemplary job with what he was dealt and what we call the round 1 and round 2 cuts. And so really, we're basically only about 200 million underwater, or to meet baseline right now. Long term, we're still have huge problems in front of us, and that's really what I guess I want to talk about here tonight. So this slide before you is different revenue options available to Wyoming, and so as you can see, these are the major possibilities of revenue enhancement. Your revenue committee, the last 2 years, we looked at everything. You name it. We looked at sales tax, property tax, personal income, corporate income, taxes on all SIN products, taxes on services, real estate transfer. Some of those got to 7 votes in our committee, or died by 1 vote to bring that bill to the floor. But the only 2 revenue enhancements your revenue committee brought forward this year from the interim were the 9-cent fuel tax increase and a nicotine increase. We actually haven't raised the price on cigarettes and nicotine since 2003. We have not increased the beer tax since 1935. So when we think about, how do we solve our revenue problems, once we've cut to the bone, what are the options available to us? Well, the easiest and quickest option is a 1-cent sales tax increase. That would bring in roughly 165 million a year. That a third of that roughly goes to your counties and cities and towns. So it certainly help out the local governments. And so biennially, that puts us pretty much in a range to get to baseline with the cuts previously established. I think people will tell you the cuts that we've already undertook are not perhaps sustainable in the long term without some of that funding coming back. We could put a sales tax back on food. You don't see that on this chart, but that's roughly 75 million a year. And so, a 1-cent sales tax increase with the sales tax back on food would really get us out of the red that we're currently in. Other, things that we've discussed include really any broad-based taxation. I know the Taxpayers Association is certainly an advocate for anything that's broad-based and fair and equitable. And property taxes and income taxes tend to meet criteria better that are broad-based, where everyone can feel a small amount of pain, but we know that it brings in a large amount of revenue. And so you can look that if we were to increase our assessment ratio on residential from 9.5 to 10.5, that's 120 million a biennium. So those are the options available. We've talked about both increases and decreases to the mineral severance. There are some other tools available. The State Board of Equalization has the authority to increase the statewide mill levy by 4 mills in an emergency situation. And so I guess the overall message I want to bring is we probably still have 2 years as we're slowly pulling down the rainy day fund to figure out the situation, but we have a structural deficit that we cannot solve quickly. The other good news I guess we can talk about in a bit is that oil prices are increasing rapidly. And if that trend maintains, you've had some of the larger investment firms in the East Coast saying that we could see $75 a barrel oil. In that type of scenario, we're getting another $100 to $150 million in Wyoming if oil prices can continue to climb over the next biennium. But again, that may be a short-term fix. And so the message I want to leave you with tonight ultimately is that we need to solve the underlying structural deficit through a combination of cuts and some small revenue enhancements. And with that, I know we're running a little bit over the allotted time, so I'll cut my time short so we can get some questions, if that's okay, moderators.
Great, thank you so much, Dan. That's very informative. The slides I know are going to be most welcome to be looked back at. So now we have time for Troy. And Troy, will you also be sharing slides? We have it so that you are able to.
I was under the belief that I couldn't, so I didn't bring any. But
well, then we'll just enjoy everything you have to say.
I'm probably going to head in a little bit different direction than we've been headed in up to this point. I kind of like to talk first about the purpose of government and what it's supposed to be. In my mind, and the Constitution will tell you, government exists to protect life and liberty. It doesn't exist to regulate the size of our toilet bowls or what kind of straw we can use. And over the last 30 years in the state of Wyoming, all we have done is grown government. And at that point in time, I'm going to steal a quote from Bob Mcewen. His model is kind of politics equals integrity plus economics. And I think the first thing I want to hit on is the integrity. If truth finds error and error hates truth. So I believe we need to make the budget way more transparent than it is. Currently, we have at least, and once again, my vast experience of 8 days, you'll have to excuse me for that, but we currently have 3 different sets of bookkeeping models or systems we use. We use the wolf system, and then the Game and Fish has their own, and YDOT has their own. And as Ashley mentioned earlier, there are these coffee cans out there all over the place. I think one of the funniest quotes I heard, and it's really not that funny, there's 5 people in the state of Wyoming who actually know where all the coffee cans are and what they are. And the rest of us are in search of them. So we don't have a good idea on what the excess is. And as you look at easy as pie, politics equal integrity plus economics, you will find the higher the integrity and the lower the taxes we take away, the larger the wealth is. And we watched in Detroit at one point in time was the richest city in the country. It's now the poorest city in the country, and it has a population base less than it did in 1900. So as we go forward on these budget crises, I think we got to keep in mind freedom creates wealth, and kind of an economic model. If you could go to Walmart and the most expensive thing in there was $99 and you had $100, you have absolute spending freedom. If we take $25 away from you, we have now taken some of your spending freedom and lowered your standard of living. If we take 50% away, and you can see where this goes, until we get down to zero. And once we get to zero, what do we call somebody who works for nothing? You're basically a slave at that time. So I think we got to be really careful with that. We're in a situation now where 51% of our college graduates in the state are working at jobs that don't require college degrees. And we got to dig into that for a couple reasons. One is that the degree programs that we're offering don't port over well. Or 2, they're just not motivated. And I don't know the answer to that, but that's where we sit today. And as we all campaign to get elected, we all say we're not going to bring any new taxes. We don't want to increase taxes, or a majority of us. I shouldn't say all of us. I know I did. And then we get to the point of, but given the current situation, we got a library problem, we got a school problem, we probably need to increase our revenue. And it comes down to a fundamental question. And what camp you fall in. Does Wyoming have a revenue issue going into this budget crisis? Or does Wyoming have a spending issue going into this crisis? I think until we figure out the buckets of money and where everything's at, you can't support a tax because you don't even know if we need it. And every time we tax somebody, we're taking their inability to energize the economy. We're reducing our own GDP. You can't grow an economy with government. The next issue we're facing as we go in there, we have a lot of regulations on outside businesses to come in here. If you had your stuff together and you were ready to open up tomorrow, it could take you 3 to 5 years to get through the hoops to even open up. And as we saw on the tax slide, the golden goose, coal, oil, and gas are taxed at 100% basis on property. And as we go forward, they're having problems paying the property tax. And unfortunately or fortunately for me, I probably have a very good understanding of this because I live in Gillette. And that's about what we do, coal, oil, and gas. And as far as criminals carry guns, and they take guns out and they can point it at you and they can rob you. We got to be careful because the government carries guns and they can come out and they can rob you too. And as we look forward to this, go forward, we need to take a comprehensive look. In 1990, we passed a bill requiring the legislature to conduct annual audits of all the agencies. Does anybody want to guess how many audits we've done since 1990? 0. In fact, I heard a quote this weekend when we were working on the budget in a group from somebody who's highly respected in the state. And she basically said, Wyoming government right now, the way it sits is unauditable. There's no overall chart of accounts. And as a business guy with 2 grocery stores, I would share with you, it would be a nightmare for me to run one store on one bookkeeping system and one store on another bookkeeping system. You can't track it. And you start looking at trying to see what's in the buckets and what's going on at the Game and Fish and what's going on at YDOT, because they're on, it's impossible. It's hard. You have to dig into it. Just to look at CARES Act funding, I've spent 3 weeks to come up with some answers on that. And I still haven't figured out where $1.25 billion went. So as we keep working, I think we need to look at the buckets of money. We need to figure out what we have for excess. We need to move to an overall chart of accounts that's transparent to everybody in the state. And then we need to audit those accounts to make sure they're getting spent the way they should get spent. I know K through 12 education is also a big issue. And I think a whole bunch of people care about that, to include myself. And as we look at those cuts, I would tell you, we have to do that in a manner that protects teachers and classrooms. But at the end of the day, it's a large chunk of our budget. And if we keep going the way we're going in the projections, by 2026, we're going to be about $972,000 overspent. And then we're going to drop the LISRA down to about $540 million. And constitutionally, when that hits $540 million, you will see huge cuts, because we won't have a choice in the legislature to do anything about it. It just gets shut off.
30 seconds, Troy.
Wow.
Sorry.
Seemed like I've only been talking for a minute. Sorry.
No worries.
It's going to crash off the end. And then what our school system is going to turn into is reading, writing, and arithmetic. We might be able to fix a few roads and provide fire and police, and then we're done. So in a sense, by not supporting a lot of the tax structure that's coming down and creating revenue versus cutting, I would like to save some money in the LSRA, give the economy a chance to even out and attract some new businesses and lower some regulations, and go forward that way. And I'm sorry I went over time.
No worries. Thank you so much. All right. Well, all of that is such wonderful information. Thank you for the excellent presentation about the challenges that Wyoming faces and what might be done. And we have now quite a few questions. And we'd like to start with 2 questions that we want each panelist to address. And let's do it in the same order in which you spoke. So the first question is a yes or no, or some other short answer. do you think that Wyoming has reached a point where new sources of revenue are needed? And the second is, if your answer to the first question is that no new sources of revenue are needed, then why do you think that? And if your answer was that new sources are needed, then what source of revenue do you support? And go ahead and please take just 1 minute each. We'll do Ashley, Robert, Dan, and Troy. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you. I think in my first slides, I said it best with the Wyoming Tax Reform 2000 study. We need to look at a new tax structure because it is unbalanced. What those suggestions are is in the report, and it's for the legislature to consider. And then what was the second question, Carrie? It was, what was your reason? Yeah, so, you know, and or what the taxes are we consider.
Yeah,
so anything that's low and broad-based and that meets our cornerstones is something that we would be pushing or supporting. But that's for the legislators that we elect to figure out. So.
Thank you. And then Robert?
Sure. So I think your first question is, do we need new taxes or new revenues? And I think the answer to that is yes. You even heard it in Troy's comments. For example, if we want to maintain the public service of K-12 education, it's more expensive than what we have funds coming in for. And the reason for that is that for many years now, we've relied on taxing other people. And that's kind of taken Wyomingites out of the equation. And by taxing other people, I mean that, you know, as Ashley showed, over 50% of our revenues, for example, for the general fund, have come from oil, gas, and coal primarily. And almost all of that is exported elsewhere. So we just add that to the price of those commodities, and other people pay the taxes. So yeah, as those decline, we have an unsustainable tax system. Now, what taxes would I be in favor of? I think that's really, and that's where values come in. There's more than one way to skin a cat here. As Dan showed, there's a number of options. And so really what that comes down to are people's values. In different places, people will value different things, or they will presume that certain actions are reasonable. And for that reason, they might support a sales tax or an income tax or property taxes, for example, or other taxes. So really what it comes down to is a discussion and what people are willing to support. And I think that unique answer will be kind of an interplay between the legislature and the voters of Wyoming as we kind of struggle to figure out what is the best option given our values in the state.
Okay, thank you, Rob. And next we have Dan.
Sure, let me build on that. Do we need new taxes? I'm not sure the answer is yes, but we need to fix the structural problem we have on who gets taxed. As we've reiterated, more than 50% of the tax revenue in Wyoming is in some way tied to the minerals industry. And while oil may be coming back, coal, I think we can all agree, has a very murky road ahead. I mean, there are national groups, respected investment banks, et cetera, saying coal may be gone by 2035 now. And so if we're not taxing minerals at 100%, how do we afford the government? Well, we either cut the government, and there are certain, there's a large segment of Wyomingites who think we need to cut more, and we will. But the ultimate answer is a different tax structure. And how we get there is the difficulty that the legislature has been unable to solve, right? We can't just start taxing A and not tax B equally, and not cut without some type of revenue source, and not give more money to cities and towns unless we're finding a way to pay for that. And so until we stabilize our revenue structure, which is still primarily built on mineral commodity prices, which can skyrocket and collapse in months nowadays, as we've seen in the last year, we're not going to be stable. And so, yes, maybe more taxation, but it has to be a stable base of taxation, which is why I'm probably more in favor of a property tax. I do think it's broad-based, and it's probably more fair than a sales tax. An income tax is probably even more fair. I just don't think your legislature in the next decade is going to get there under the current representation. But I do think a property tax is probably achievable. We can raise it in Wyoming, and it would still be less than any of our surrounding 7 states on residential. And I do think we can all pay a little more.
Tax ladder.
Okay. Thank you, Dan. Troy?
My answer to that question is yes, we do need to increase revenue streams. However, there's 2 ways to do it. There's public ways through taxes, or there's private ways through reducing taxes. If we've watched at a national level, we've had 3 presidents that came in and cut taxes, and the economy just went crazy. Growth started happening, innovation started happening, new industries started to show up. And that would be John F. Kennedy, Ronald Reagan, and Donald Trump. And through tax cuts that Donald Trump did, our GDP just went through the ceiling. So I think as we go forward in Wyoming, we need to find ways to keep money in people's pockets so we can have innovation, so we can have new jobs, so we can attract new industries. Right now, we do have a very low tax rate for the individual. For me and you, when I go home at night, my tax rate is low. But the tax rate on the businesses and people coming in is actually fairly high. And that is higher than almost all the states around us. We tax coal more, we tax oil more. In fact, coal we tax second highest in the nation. Montana beats us. Oil, we are the highest. And if you watch trucks drive up and down I-80, look for a Wyoming license plate on one of them. And call me if you find one, because I think you're going to see Utah and Oklahoma. Thank you, ma'am.
All right. Thank you so much. And now we're going to go to questions and comments from the audience. And we'll take as many as there is time for. We'll go probably to the top of the hour. And again, there'll be 1 minute to respond. And most of these will be questions that are drawn randomly. You know, if we were doing political science majors here, then maybe I would be finding ones that were thematically consistent, but I'm just going to pull them randomly from the questions that have come in the chat. So to begin with, do you think that Wyoming voters have a good understanding of the state's financial condition? And if not, then what more should be done to educate them? And let's go ahead and say whoever wants to answer this. It can be all 4 of you or it can be just one. Dan?
Let me start, because I think sometimes we're our own worst enemy. I do think Wyoming voters are aware of the financial situation, because for the last 2 years, the media and your legislature have said there's a problem and we might have to raise taxes. And so if you look at the campaigning done over the last year, right, a large number of people who were elected campaigned on, I will not raise your taxes. And so we kind of shot ourselves in the foot a little bit for those of us who think we need to raise somewhere. But I think the message has gotten out. I mean, every Black Diamond, the coal mines that have gone under, the power plants that are going to start shutting down the next 3 years. I think the message is out there. It's just how do we make up that revenue? And that's the question that remains. Is it through continued cuts, or is it through, raising a tax somewhere?
Ashley? Oh, sorry.
I'll let the senator go ahead.
I think we haven't reduced government in 30 years. And I think the governor did do a good job at his first round of cuts. But we haven't reduced anything. For example, K through 12 spending in year 2000 was $500 million. K through 12 spending today is $1.8 billion. And if you adjusted that spending from 2000 to today by a 53% inflation rate, it would be about $800 million. So it's hard for me to imagine where the extra money's going, and we need to take a look at it. Thank you.
All right. And others on that?
So I would say that as being an advocacy group that focuses on research and education and information, people are very thirsty for this information and understanding it, because our MO is if you don't pay attention. And because of the low burden on the individuals, they've just kind of dug their heads in the sand. So I think with the reductions that are coming, people are starting to wake up a little bit and analyze it a little bit further. So I would push back on the spending. I would agree maybe in the education budget, but in the general fund, per that slide that came from the Legislative Service Office's budget books, you know, we were at $4.2 billion in the general fund that funds rest of the agencies in 2007, 2008 in the height of coal. And we're down to 2.9 billion with the 500 million reduction. We're at 2.4. So I think they've done a great job at cutting the general fund. The governor wasn't allowed to cut the school foundation program. So that will be I think that's the next spending conversation.
All right. Thank you.
I'd just add, so to your general question, are voters, do they feel that they're informed? You know, the work that we've done, they feel like they're beginning to be. People are, as Dan said, and Ashley, they're definitely interested in gathering information. I think that it's a long road though, and it's a complicated issue. And I think people are just beginning to tackle it now because the problem, as Ashley said, is right in front of them. For quite a while, we've let other people pay a lot of our taxes, and so it's not really been required that we pay attention too much. But as cuts begin to hit home, we're going to begin to realize what we're losing, and that is going to force us to think about the trade-offs we're facing. What do we want to pay for? What are our values? What do we want to see Wyoming as? And so I think that people are going to look for more information before they make those decisions. But something that people do feel like now is that they have some information, but they're not fully informed. And so I think it's events like this that are going to help fill that gap.
Okay. So a comment related to the idea of compassion. Do elected officials take compassion into account when deciding what budget cuts to make? And related to that, it took a long time to remove the grocery tax. It's the most regressive of all. It became a blessing for many poor and elderly to have it removed and would be criminal to put it back. So comments about compassion in budget cuts and about the grocery tax.
So I'll start because I did vote to take the sales tax off food 14 years ago, and it was a very close vote, and we did it. Do we talk about compassion? I'm not sure we couch it in those terms, but I could probably tell you there's 6 different taxes in the running for what's the most regressive tax. That gets thrown around a lot on what may be and what may not be. You know, your legislature is elected by people all over the state to make decisions based on our constituency, and what we hear and what I hear in Cheyenne is very different than I'm sure what Senator Mcewen hears up in Campbell County, right? Cheyenne is a government based community with a military base and state and a lot of federal government here. So we're very much more sensitive, I think, to education funding, where, you know, other parts of the state are much more in tune with industry and the mineral commodity aspects. So I think ultimately what we all want is, if we do have to pay taxes, we want to know that where they're going, to be transparent, to be accountable, and to be fair. And so when we talk about, you know, what services do we cut? Is that compassionate more or less than raising a tax back? Is putting the tax back on food to, you know, give us $150 million a year to help fund some of those social programs that affect the elderly, the disabled? What's more compassionate? I mean, you know, every one of the 90 legislators has a different idea of what that means. So in my mind, yes, put the sales tax back on food. Those people who, you know, have SNAP, have TANF, have other government programs for the most needy, but that it's broad based across, you know, the state, and we can use that 150 million it would generate per biennium to fund some of those social programs to continue to help our senior centers and our disabled. So it's tough when the word compassionate is used. That's why I chair the corporations committee, because it's business decisions. Poor Chairman Wilson in Labor Health has to do a lot of the compassionate stuff and hear that aspect of government.
Okay.
I think the first thing we need to do before we discuss new taxes is we need to get a handle on a chart of accounts and figure out where everything's at to see if we need to. We have a little bit of time as we go through this budget session and get ready, and it's just a supplemental. Next year will be another budget. I think we need to take the time to identify what's where and what we really have, and how much property and stuff government at state and county level owns. I think that would alarm you too. Maybe not, but until we get a handle on it, it seems to me that increasing taxes is just the easy way out instead of doing the hard work that we probably need to do. Thank you.
All right. Another question. If all sales tax exemptions were removed, how much additional revenue would that bring the state? So that's the exemptions to the sales tax.
So real quick, we have what we call the three majors, the sales tax on food exemption, which is 75 million or 150 million a biennium, a data center exemption, which is 40 million, which there was a bill yesterday in House Revenue Committee, which failed, that would have taken out that exemption. And the other one is on manufacturing. And most of your legislators are trying to encourage manufacturing every chance we get. But I would say Wyoming is consistently rated #1 or #2 in business friendliest states for the past 2 decades. And we still lost 1% of our population last year. So there must be something else besides just taxation policy that's not attracting businesses to Wyoming. And we need to figure out what that is.
Okay. Does anybody else want to comment about the exemptions?
I kind of
Ashley?
want to go off on a little bit
Troy,
of a
sorry.
tangent on that. I'm for some of the exemptions that are coming up. One of them is the pollination guys, beekeepers. Every form of agriculture in the state has a tax exemption except those guys. And most of them are actually producing and doing well and helping the economy out. So kind of a long roundabout way to say, I think we need to keep some of the exemptions.
Okay. Ashley, did you have a comment on this one?
I'm going to leave it to my legislators to decide which exemptions come on or off. But I did just provide in the chat box the list of all the exemptions as provided by the Department of Revenue.
Okay. All right. Question about healthcare. If government is to protect, that includes protecting life, and then basic healthcare is essential. And many governments understand this. Healthy people can work and take care of their families. Could, for example, Medicaid expansion happen this year? Or on the other hand, there was another question further up, which is about the role of healthcare in government, which I'm not finding it at the moment, but let's go from there. So does it protect? You know, if the role of government is to protect life, then does that include basic health care?
I'll jump on that grenade, I guess. No, I don't believe it's the government's job to provide people health care. In fact, I honestly believe the more government is involved in any type of activity, it is hugely inefficient, it's expensive, it's bloated. I think we need to get out of it. If we look at the 20s, we didn't have a problem with healthcare, and we didn't even have a federal income tax. So I think we need to put it back on a competitive market and have and it's really, in my mind, a federal problem. We got to quit protecting all the insurance companies and making sure they're making money and make them compete fairly, and the costs will go down and people will be able to afford it. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments on that one?
I would say Wyoming's constitution requires us to provide for the general health and welfare of the citizenry. There's certainly different interpretations of what that means. So I would say the government has some role in protecting our constituents' health. And we do that through OSHA programs, various other means. But when it comes to medical care and subsidizing or using the word socializing medicine, you know, it's sometimes a large gray area and sometimes a fine line in the sand, depending on the issue. But I don't think you're going to find any Republican legislators say that the Wyoming should be encouraging and increasing the government to cover the health care of citizens. We tend to have a pretty strong reaction to going too far down that road. As you can see, that we're one of the few states now that haven't passed Medicaid expansion, like states like Oklahoma or Idaho or Montana now.
All right, and Troy, if you'll permit me, I appreciated your metaphor about jumping on a grenade. One of our principles in Braver Angels is that we're not afraid of passionate emotions and strong opinions. And we do believe in treating each other with respect, even though we hold different views on things. So in that spirit, I would like to ask you, if you'll forgive the rephrase of a question somebody else said, that the freedom to be able to live your life with what you have is curtailed by ill health. And so if government is not helping to provide for good health, then wouldn't that be considered a form of affecting freedom?
Well, that's an interesting way to put that question. No, I ultimately, we have to be responsible for ourselves, and we need to get out of the insurance business and make the healthcare business competitive again. And then you'll probably relieve most of the issues that people can't afford healthcare. Right now, healthcare deductibles are up to $20,000 in some cases. And those plans are hugely expensive. And we're going to collect money from people to pay for that. They can't probably afford it themselves. So that's kind of where I'm at on that one. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Any other comments on that one? All right. Then let's switch to a different topic here. I believe the severance tax flows to the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund. However, since the energy producers pay 1,000% of assessed value for property tax, I assume that goes to the general fund. How about upping everyone else's factor?
Let me try to answer that. So 1969, we passed the constitutional amendment in Wyoming for a portion of severance taxes to go directly into the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund. In good years, up to 20% of Wyoming's general fund has been funded on an investment interest from the PMTF, which has been great. Sometimes it's been down as low as 12. In 2005, my first term, when we had money everywhere, we actually upped that, what we call the 1% severance tax. And we added that statutorily to go into the PMTF. Since we've had revenue issues the past 4 years, we've been diverting that different places. It's now actually, I think in this budget, trying to help out our education budget, but it's still about 120 million. I don't think it's a surprise that, you know, minerals have paved the way for everyone in this state for 5 generations, and we are pretty close to the end of the line. You know, there's a war on fossil fuels in this country. Whether or not it should be happening, it is. Sometimes perception's reality, but coal will probably go away, and oil won't be too further behind in another generation. as the rest of America continues to try to get away from fossil fuels. 50% of our revenue is going away in the next 20 years. We have some pretty serious issues we have to solve, and quickly, because bringing in new businesses and economic development doesn't just happen in 1 year. I mean, it's a 5, 10, 20-year plan, and we got to get on it quickly because the future looks increasingly bleak when it comes to what is traditionally paid 50% of our revenues, add another 20% for investment off of minerals. That's how dire it is in the next 2 decades, that even if we can balance the budget right now, we got to have a long-term plan and a structural change rapidly in this state to be able to face our future.
All right, and then we'll just have time for one more question. Hopefully each of you will have something to say on this. This is a short one, but there have been a lot of questions that have come in on the topic of income tax. And so one short version of this question is, why is an income tax not viable right now? And anything else that you want to comment on the topic of income tax. So let's try to get one comment from each of you on this one. And Troy, why don't you go first on this one?
Okay.
Lobbing grenades.
There we go. I think an income tax at this time is a terrible idea. I'm reading some of the comments, and they're talking about people going to food banks. We got mines shutting down. I think it's time to hunker down. I want a Ferrari, but I own a grocery store and I can't buy a Ferrari. And I certainly can't go to the 2 businesses around me and collect some more of their money so I can go buy a Ferrari. At the end of the day, as you run your own home budgets, and I'm sure everybody here has been through tough times and good times, there's weeks where you don't go to the grocery store and buy steaks. You buy hamburger or chicken because that's what you can afford. And we really need to get the state back to what we can afford, not what we want, but what we need. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Dan, why is an income tax not viable?
Oh, I didn't say it wasn't viable. It's just probably not legislatively possible. But this is a bill we looked at in the Revenue Committee this summer, that if we imposed a state income tax on people making more than $500,000 a year, and our Constitution allows us to take off all other taxes if we were to ever institute an income tax. So really, if you're making, we just put an income tax on people 500,000 a year and above. We're literally talking about 800 people and would raise $100 million. And you can call it the Jackson tax, but that's the power of an income tax at a high level of people making over $500,000 a year. I wouldn't support an income tax across the board right now either, although I am co-sponsoring a bill on an unearned or an unearned income investment tax, basically what Tennessee does. So they have an income tax on investments. And so Representative Schwartz is bringing that bill, which could generate $100 million as well. And I would echo, we are one of only 2 states that does not have a corporate income tax or what they call a gross receipts tax. They're interchangeable. It's only Wyoming and South Dakota at a 7% tax rate, which is kind of standard across the board with our constitutional provision. It would be about $23 million a year to put on that corporate income tax. And I haven't seen that bill coming this year, but it's still in the discussion. So we're very proud in Wyoming. We don't have an income tax. I don't think that's going to be the first thing we're going to go to. Although it might be the most fair, it's not the most palatable.
Okay, so different perspectives on fairness and palatability. All right, and let's say, Rob, sorry, my screen is rearranged.
Sure. So I think I agree with Dan in a lot of ways with this. So there's a few different ways to look at this. In our legislature, we have a limited time to come together and create solutions. So one of the problems with an income tax is I think that would be a real stretch, just given where we are and how proud we are. The values in Wyoming seem to go against that in a lot of ways. And we might spend a lot of time arguing over it and not get anywhere. So I think part of the problem here might just be let's start looking at the taxes we already have and seeing what we can do with those before we move to the income tax. The second thing about the income tax is, as Dan said, due to our Constitution, and you could argue why this amendment was made, before any income taxes are payable, we have to give credit to all other taxes paid in the state. So that, in some ways, that might have undermined the effectiveness of an income tax. You would then, as Dan said, you're really only aiming it at the wealthiest people and a smaller group of people in the state. But that also makes, if you were to take that into account, that would also make our income tax very progressive. As Dan said, it would really be taxing the wealthiest or the highest income earners in the state. So there are potential things to look at there, and some people might think of that as fair. Others might think that that's entirely unfair. A benefit of an income tax, though, is that they tend to be more stable. People's incomes don't vary nearly as much as, say, commodity markets, which is what we depend on now. And so a benefit in an income tax, and other states find this, is that their tax revenues don't change nearly as much as other parts of the economy. So there are pluses and minuses. My personal guess would be that, as Dan said, I just don't think there's a political appetite for that in the state. And so kind of being a pragmatic guy, I think, if we have limited time to deal with this, probably we want to look at the solutions that are more likely to happen than the less likely ones. But that's just an opinion, and it could change as people become more educated about what their choices are.
All right. And Ashley?
Sure, just from a tax policy standpoint, when you're looking at sound tax policy and low broad-based taxing, and I'm not going to debate the issue if we need it or not, we'll leave that to the legislators, but if they did impose an income tax that was across the board, low and broad-based, that could be something we support down the road. The corporate income tax, because of our Constitution, has so many problems, and like Representative Zwanitzer said, the yield, I don't know, would be worth the burn, to be honest. So really the cards left on the table for Wyoming to truly look at and standing up a whole new tax system is an individual income tax. I did post the bills in the chat box that are under consideration right now, and the one Representative Zwanitzer is sponsoring.
Great, thank you so much. Well, that brings us to past the top of the hour, so we're going to wrap this up here. This has been a very interesting interchange, and there are so many more questions and comments in the chat. I think we could not really get a thorough examination of taxation in an hour or an hour and a half. But it's interesting to note that this audience has concerns about so many different aspects of the taxation. Taking a good thorough look at what we actually are doing and being able to understand what we are actually doing right now seems to be something that resonates with a lot of people. We're really concerned about which groups are affected by the use of taxes. We're really concerned about which groups are affected by where taxes are drawn from in the first place. And we have a strong thread too of people who are concerned about what does government actually do, what is supposed to do in constitutional terms and in terms of what our basic charter of agreement is with each other, of what we can and cannot require from each other. So, and there's so many details in all of these. Each have our constituencies and our niches that we're concerned about. And from all of us here who have put this workshop together, this panel together, we'd like to say thank you for bringing your real thoughts and concerns to the table. And now, Fran and Chris, I believe that you have some final comments. I'll turn the time over to you.
Actually,
She's muted.
You muted yourself again, Fran. There you go.
Thank you. Carrie, we have time for final comments from the panelists.
Oh, do we? I thought we were supposed to end at 8 and here we're going over. All right, that's wonderful. So let's go ahead then and we can take another question then. Maybe a good final question would be, what does Wyoming need to do to work on its economic infrastructure on those issues so that we're not having the same discussion next year or the year after or 5 years from now? How do we get there? All right, Ashley, would you like to start on that one? How do we get there so we're not just keep having the same discussion over and over?
I think just if you don't pay, you don't pay attention. So you probably as an individual citizen need to start paying attention and communicating with your legislature or legislator your values, like Dr. Godby talked about, and what's important to you. There is constitutionality of what they're able to spend money on and appropriate for. So I think the senator had some great points on the spending conversation, and it's going to have to come from both sides of the aisle and both sides of the balance sheet of spending and revenues. Oh, and my final comment is check out our website. We have a ton of information to help you get educated.
Excellent. Although it won't be as much fun without you there to explain it. All right. And Rob?
Yeah, I think I would, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Carrie.
No, I was just going to repeat the question for you, but if you've got it, then that's fine.
Oh, I think I have it. So where do we go from here, I think is what you're asking. Is that right?
How do we not repeat the same thing? You know, can we make some headway?
Yeah, so I think what we're beginning to understand is, you know, in the past, we've kind of kicked the can down the road. What we really need is a structural reform here. In the past, we've avoided, or we've been lucky enough to avoid really tough decisions. But this time it looks like we're not going to be able to avoid those. So the first thing I'd agree with Ashley that we need to have a conversation, and people need to express their values and opinions to the legislators so that they're not flying blind in this. The second thing is it's a really complicated problem. Troy's mentioned this. We don't have a very transparent revenue system. It's in fact, there was a report out of Brookings about a year ago where the authors made the comment that if you wanted to design a system that was opaque, you would probably do well to look at Wyoming. It's a pretty complicated structure of how revenues flow from one place to the next. We probably need to streamline that and understand it more. And there's been a lot of effort to create that transparency, and the governor and the legislature are working on that. But the real problem is that our tax structure is just unsustainable, it appears, as it is now. And to change your tax structure, it's just a huge mountain to move. To forgive the analogy, how do you eat an elephant? You do it one bite at a time, but it's going to take a while. And so it may seem like we're having the same conversations over and over again, but the real point, I think, is having those conversations and making those decisions, and making government work the way it's supposed to, which is through compromise and conversation. Reflecting the values of the people that are represented. And that means that we're going to make incremental change. The problem that we face, though, is that, the clock is ticking. That structural deficit remains, and we do need to make changes to avoid effectively running out of savings or running into a situation where we have to make cuts that we otherwise wouldn't want to. So I think it's going to take a while. But it's valuable to have those conversations, and maybe we need to take the time we need to take to get it right.
Okay. And let's see, Dan? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I think the long-term path forward is through more conversation and people understanding Wyoming's economics. A large portion of people in Southeast Wyoming don't understand that our revenues come from coal and oil and gas, and they don't work in the fields and the mines like people, in the western and northeast part of our states. I think sometimes those people just see Cheyenne as this evil entity and don't understand, in economics, you need a couple of large population centers to cover your sales taxes and your economic developments and your other things. I mean, we exist together as one whole in Wyoming, even including Teton County with their tourism revenue. And so understanding where all of our revenue comes from and understanding the threats to the revenue that, as I said, are just not likely to be there, at least to the level they are in 20 years. I have people all the time, especially my friends on the coast, say, why is Wyoming stuck on coal and oil and gas, and why can't you move faster onto renewables? And I have to explain to them, because that's the only thing paying our bills right now. So if I get beat up sometimes in my own local community, like, why are you still so pro coal and doing all these bills to keep power plants, coal burning alive? Quite honestly, that's our only source of revenue that's paying half of the bills in this state right now. And so it is, as weird as it sounds, it is in all of our interest to keep coal around as long as possible, to keep our economy going and keep our government services going until we can figure out how to transition off. And that's a difficult conversation to have, most certainly. But people, from all over Wyoming need to understand the complexities and the problems that we all face in our individual parts of the state. And we're also individualistic. It's tough to get that message across. But I think conversations like this and communication with policymakers on, how much money do we want in education? Can it take a 10% cut? What does that look like? And how far can we cut until we get to the point of no return, where you can't right the ship and you go through another 20 years where the population in Wyoming from 1982 to 2004 was, we lost population for 20 years and didn't reclaim until 2005. And we're looking like we're dipping now again. So we have some serious problems ahead of us.
I would be willing to bet the people in Texas aren't wondering why we're not going to renewables right now. In fact, my daughter's down there in Kerrville. My wife had to go down 2 days ago because after it warmed up, all the pipes in her house burst. So there's a future for coal. And while we're going to chase renewables, they're building 200 coal-fired power plants all over the world almost daily. Now, I don't know the exact numbers, but it's a lot. We need to see what we can do with structure to get coal overseas. We're not going to legislate or control China into renewables. So there is a future, but we also have to attract a more diverse business sector, if you will, or diversify our economy so we don't, and I'm going to use a cliche now, have all of our eggs in one basket. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And now we have a few minutes. What we'd like to do now is hear if any of our speakers have questions for each other.
Real quick, maybe Dr. Godby could talk about the Craig, and we forecast our budget in advance. And even though we might meet our budget this term, just a little bit of conversation on what the 5-year outlook looks like. I don't know if he's projected that or the Craig group has or not, but I think that'd be good for people to know.
Do you want me to share that, Dr. Godby?
Yeah, if you could, if you've got the Craig report up. So what we do, so when Representative Swanitzer talks about the Craig report, what we actually try to do is project where we think taxes will be, or at least revenues will be, and what that implies for government as it is now. Really what we try to project, though, is just the revenue picture. And so the first part of that problem is actually in trying to estimate where energy, the biggest thing we try to estimate is actually energy revenues and how those might change. That's why it's called a consensus revenue estimating group. A number of us come to the table with different outlooks. What you get presented with is the consensus. And then we look at how the economy might perform. Long term, without getting into all the numbers on this chart, and thanks for that, Ashley, because I think it's worth looking at. What we expect is that in the short term, our revenues are going to continue to be low, although that they're going to recover as the economy recovers. But longer term, we are expecting that the primary source of revenues that we have will continue to decline. We all know about coal. You know, despite the fact that, you know, people have hope for coal, it doesn't appear that coal is going to reverse the decline that it's in now. Natural gas has been declining for years now. It's been kind of, well, attention's been focused elsewhere. I think people haven't noticed that natural gas production has declined over the last decade significantly. Really what's kind of kept the total oil, gas, and coal revenue or mineral revenue stable or growing has been a very strong oil market and, or at least oil production in the state. But as some in the chat have noted, between concerns about climate change and technological changes in the transportation sector, other changes and choices that we're making, oil may be in its last boom in the next decade or so. So the real issue that we face, we only project 5 years out. And even at the end of those 5 years, we have significant discussions on trying to project where those revenues might be. What we do face, and I think most people on Craig, if not all of us, recognize that we do have a structural deficit, which is just that our revenues are not going to be significant enough or large enough to cover the costs of government that we've become used to. What Craig doesn't do, though, is recommend budgetary policies. All we do is talk about where our revenue might be as the basis for a conversation about what we might do about it.
My turn to be unmuted. Any other questions that the panelists have for each other? All right. Okay, so now I'd like you each to just take maybe a minute and give us each a final comment to tie together, you know, the message you'd like us to take away from you today. Who would like to go first?
I'll go first. First, I want to thank everybody for the effort they put into this. I think it was a very good event, and it's kind of nice. Part of the fun of being in the legislation for me so far is all of the different ideas, and none of us have it all right. So it's kind of nice to hear other opinions, and I just want to thank you again for inviting me to this event.
Thank you for coming. Rob, would you like to go next?
Sure. So first I'll echo Senator McKeon's comment that thank you for having us here. We really appreciate it. And I think it's events like this that are really important because there are a lot of different choices in front of us. There's not a single recipe to fix this. You know, I've used the analogy before. There's lots of ways to skin a cat. What we have to figure out is the one that works for us. And so that is going to require two things. The first is understanding what the choices are and understanding, at least having some sense of what those trade-offs might be, right? Every choice, there's no free lunch with those things, right? Where they have some pain, but they have some gain. And what we really have to do is think about what we value and really what we want Wyoming to be. You know, we shouldn't just focus on, you know, if you're driving a car, the last thing you should do is focus on what's in front of the hood. You want to look down the road. So what is the Wyoming that we really want to have? What do we value most in Wyoming? And what would it take to create that Wyoming? That might be the basis of the start of a conversation. And that's a very positive conversation because you're focusing on what's good in your community. And then you can work backwards to what that might take and how you might get there. And that's where different choices and different values come in. And so, you know, I just encourage people to keep talking about it. because the more people that are involved, the more likely it is that we will come to a solution that's probably better for most people. I won't say best, but that would be great if we could get there.
All right, thank you so much. Ashley?
Sure, I think Dr. Gabi summarized it pretty well. I just think back to my points of discussion moving forward, the efforts for more transparency, for education, just really paying attention to understanding, even though we're trying to make it, or groups are trying to make it more streamlined, just trying to educate yourself more and communicating with your legislator, and really thinking about what the end goal is for you and for Wyoming. And again, I invite you to check out our website at wyotax.org. And I'm more than happy to point you in different directions on the state website to help starting to understand the bigger picture. And
All right.
event.
All right, thank you, Ashley. And Dan, would you finish us up?
Sure, I would just say I think information is power. And so there's information in, do we have more government than we need? Where can we cut? I've tried to have some hard conversations on saying, we probably don't need 23 counties or 99 cities or 90 legislators in a state of 570,000 people. Those are really tough conversations to have, and we continue to say we have too much government and too much bureaucracy. When it comes right down to local level, people get kind of skittish and saying, well, cut somewhere else, not my backyard. But that's the level of conversations I think we're at in Wyoming as we transition from the energy economy we've had for a century to whatever we're going to have next. It is going to take those conversations about what right sizing government is. Do we need 48 school districts in Wyoming? And so I did try for 2 years as a chairman of the revenue committee to try some tax increases or revenue enhancements, whatever you want to call them. The legislature this time is not supportive of those. And so it really is going to be, I think, continued cutting for the next biennium. But hopefully as part of that, people will get more engaged, understand what they're paying for. And I do think at the end of the day, the accountability and transparency aspects, people, are happy or generally willing at least to pay more in taxes if they know for sure where their money's going to. So perhaps allowing the local cities and counties more latitude and to be able to increase their mills or their property or sales tax at a local level where people can look at that accounting and know exactly what their revenue is going for and who it pays and what the benefit is. I think that's ultimately where everybody wants to get to. Are we paying for what we need? Are we paying too much? Do we really need what we have? And as we continue this conversation of ratcheting down government and bureaucracy and potentially trying to increase revenues, there's going to be a sweet spot we hit. I'm just hoping we figure it out sooner than later as we move the state forward long term.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for this very informative discussion. Yes, thank you so much. The jazz hands, this is our way of clapping on Zoom. And now, to wrap this up, we're going to have the poll again, the same one that we had at the beginning. And let's go ahead and throw that up and take a moment to fill that out. And as soon as that is done, I will turn the time over to Fran and to Chris to wrap it up. And thanks again for everybody being here. Your presence as a listener, even if you did not have a chance to actually ask any questions, your presence here is very much a part of what has made this possible. So thank you.
I can't even vote.
We'll give it another minute
Are you
or
voting?
30 seconds.
How are you voting?
You don't see do you see the poll?
I'm clicking on things, but it's not doing
You
it.
don't get the poll if you're an administrator. It's only everyone else.
I guess I don't get to vote. I'm an administrator.
We'll share the results. I took some screen prints because they are anonymous, so they disappear when the meeting's over. Okay, so we'll end well, Okay, I'm going to end the polling. Do you see the results?
Yes, it looks like about half the people voted. Well,
Yeah, and we'll take a look. We were curious about pre and post, so we'll take a look between those. But I think the tax increase maybe went up. The people that see that it may be necessary. Okay. Chris, you want to go?
Or do you have the slide?
Yes.
I want to thank everybody for coming and participating and being civil. And I especially appreciate the panelists giving up their time and all the volunteers with Braver Angels putting in their time. Braver Angels is a grassroots movement, mostly volunteer led. Carrie, all her time was volunteered leading up to this. Our mission is bringing Americans together to bridge the partisan divide, and in doing so, strengthen our democratic republic. Please take time in the next few days to check out Braver Angels. You can sign up to get information. That's how we get Wyoming emails. You don't have to pay just to be on the list, but if you like our mission, you can spend as little as $12 a year. We offer workshops on how to speak with family members who have different political opinions. We offer skills workshops of all kinds, and the debates are awesome. You can join the national debates. There's going to be one next week, so do check that out. There's a lot. This was kind of a hybrid town hall event, a new event with Braver Angels. And with that, I'm wondering if Fran or Lindy had more to say. Oh, and I forgot to thank Wyoming Tribune Eagle very much for this. It was their idea.
And we do have, Lindy, you want to speak about the alliances here? I put another screen up. We have a Facebook page.
yes. Thanks, Fran. The Rural Alliance is, there's the urbans everywhere in the United States, but there are not as many rurals, and our whole state is rural. And so anybody can be a part of the Rural Alliance, and small towns. It's also small towns as well. And we are planning an event that will be a debate about should Weld County or other places secede and join Wyoming. And so if you're interested in that topic, you can certainly let me know, and we will have choose people to, you have to register, and then we will choose people to represent the sides. So I appreciate a lot more people to get involved in the Rural Alliance.
And then the last thing we want to thank everybody for being here, and we certainly want to take some feedback toward future events that we would plan. So we have prepared a brief evaluation form. I will put the link, or Chris, maybe you could put the link in the chat again. And if you could take a minute before we finish to just open up the link in another window on your computer, if you're comfortable doing that, and fill it out after we're done. But that way you'll have the link. We will take a look at that and plan other events in 2021 around your feedback. So thank you very much.